Yesterday, I received this message from a man who's been discerning the things that I say and discerning what it is that I'm doing. And a lot of people say that. A lot of people say that they're discerning, but they don't actually do it. So we've been talking back and forth, and he's been asking me questions about some of the things that I talk about. And yesterday, he sent me a message and graciously sort of acknowledged that some of the things he was asking he felt were a little personal. And so he said to me, "You don't have to answer these things if you don't want to." But here's the thing, guys. I'm inviting you to ask me questions by sharing my testimony with you. I don't share my testimony with you so that if you ask a question, then I say that's none of your business, because this is my role right now. This is my role, to be on display. As Paul said, it seems to me that we're on display. It seems to me we've been made a spectacle of for everyone to see, like one, at the end of the procession, condemned to die in their arena. Believe me, this is what God's servants are expected to do. Needless to say, I appreciate the fact that he was, wanting to respect my privacy, but also hears me say certain things and is scratching his head and is like, why is she doing it that way? I want to tell you something about this. He asked questions yesterday that no one has asked me in the entire time I've been doing this. I try to explain certain things to you. I try to actually be very upfront and forthright about what it is that I'm doing and why I'm doing certain things, why God has led me into doing certain things. But no one asks these questions, and it's so concerning to me that people are not discerning. Because if you hear me say I don't have enough, that I'm suffering to meet my basic needs, but I have a commercial building, which, by the way, the commercial building is not like there are a lot of different types of buildings, right? This is not a huge building. It actually was at one time a home many years ago, and it's a 2-story home essentially that is zoned commercial. But if you hear me say that I have this building that God has me keep and my home is in foreclosure, it's kind of weird that people are not like, what's going on here? It's kind of weird that people are not asking these questions of like, why does God have you keep that when your home is in foreclosure? And by the way, I don't even know the status of the building. But I got a notice the other day from the LA County Recorder of something that had been changed. I don't even read the mail anymore, because it's like either God is going to fulfill and make a way for the things that he's told me to obey, which I believe with all my heart, or this has all been a lie and I have flipped my cookies. Like I'm certifiably nuts. I'm well aware of that. You should also be well aware of that. Like, you should also be thinking either she's doing what she says she's doing or she is certifiably nuts. And with that being, those are two like very drastic, extreme opposites. So I would think that you would go back to God and ask him, so which one is it? One of the things that this man said in his email is that I am in the category of one of these things is not like the other. And I genuinely love that description. And it's what I want to talk with you about in this, part of what I want to talk with you about in this video is what God's servants look like. They don't look like the rest of the world. They look certifiably nuts in a lot of ways. I mean, the God uses the foolish things to confound the wise, the foolish things of the world to confound the wise. He's not using the things that you've been raised to think are intelligent or strategic or good. If you're in God, you should be distinct from the rest of the world. You should not look at all like the rest of the world or counterfeit Christianity. You should be standing out. Let me say this another way. If you're the light of the world, there's going to be a clear distinction between you and darkness. And people are going to need to discern that. You're going to need to discern that. On a daily basis, I have to discern. I'm still doing what you say I'm doing, right? I'm actually doing what you want me to do, because this is crazy. So if I'm discerning myself on a daily basis, and I have to keep going back to God to make sure that this is correct and ask him for a witness, show me in your scriptures where your servants were doing this, because this feels nuts. How is it possible that you guys hear me say certain things that you don't ask, that you don't discern with him, and you don't ask me those questions? For 3 years, this is the first person who's asked me, how does this add up? And I'm not offended by it. You guys should be questioning. You should be testing my spirit to see if I'm from God. Here's the thing. Today's baking day because Passover ended, Passover has ended. And so the yeast that, my yeast starter that I bake with, I threw it out on the first night of Passover. And I've been working on that starter for the last couple days. By the way, if anyone does this, or is getting started in making a yeast starter, a good way to speed up the process is, I make my own yogurt. So I have yogurt on hand, and it's a good thing to. So I just throw a little bit of yogurt, like 1 or 2 tablespoons in the starter, depending on how big the starter is going to be. And I'm doing a couple of them because I'm making one for my son-in-law. So I just mix some yogurt in there, and it gets the starter going faster. But anyway, today is baking day, okay? So a little while ago, I had to pause the video to go knead the dough because I'm making bagels and bread and tortillas. You hear me talk about these things, don't you? You hear me talk about canning the salsa for my kids and stuff like that. But then you also hear me talk about, at times, not knowing where my next meal is coming from. And actually, the other day, I kind of spoke incorrectly. I was not intending to be deceptive. I have food in my house right now. I don't have this like abundance and variety like I used to, when I had money. In fact, there's no meat in my house right now, but I have learned to live with what God has given me. I know what it's like to live in plenty, just like, Paul said. I know what it's like to have abundance, and I know what it's like to, be satisfied with the little that God has given me. So right now, what I have been eating on a daily basis, beans and rice. The last time that I went and purchased some meat, I asked the butcher for some bones, and the place that I go to, they are really gracious and give you free bones. So I had a little bit of broth that I canned from these beef bones, and it's delicious. And so if I get sick of just eating beans and rice, then I add a little broth to it and some onions, and I make a little soup. I'm not living high on the hog over here, and I have a little bit of cheese in the fridge, so maybe I'll put some cheese on it. That's how I live, very, very, very simply. And because of the graciousness of someone who anonymously sent a box from Sam's Club of all of these, like of a bag of onions and some frozen vegetables, some bread flour. I mean, there were several things in this box. In bulk, I was able to chop up those onions and put them put some in the freezer so that it would last me a little while. I'm able to bake my bread. So you might hear me talk about these things, there are times when I don't know, like things are running low, basic needs are running low, and I don't know how am I going to live, Lord, how am I going to live, and he brings me to that place. And then something comes through. He puts it on the heart of someone to provide, or he conforms circumstances, or something, or my children end up having something, and my children and I share what we have because we're all in the same situation. We all have doctorates. We all gave up our doctorates. Technically not my son-in-law. My son-in-law originally was going to go into medicine, and God moved him. He was the first one, actually, that God moved to do something else. So he does have his doctorate, but he has his doctorate in PT, which is a very different income from going into medicine. And he abides by the principle that physical training is of some value, but godliness has value in this age and in the age to come. So all of that to say, we're all struggling. We're all wondering how God is going to provide, but also knowing that God is going to provide. Like, we stand in that confidence. And so when you hear me say, like, I'm baking, I'm baking tortillas and bread and bagels, you might think, well, what is she talking about that she is living in this way? My children and I share what we have, and God provides. And we feel a lot of the time, even though you hear what I'm eating and you hear how simple, we feel when we sit down that we have abundance. We're not doing without, but we are pushed to the brink of wondering how we're going to be provided for. And what it reminds me of is it reminds me of the widow who, when Elijah came to town, he asked her for some bread, and she said, this is all I've got. I'm going home to bake it for me and my son, and we're going to die. I am not even kidding you that is that. I don't want to be exaggerative or blasphemous, but there are some things that I did, basic needs that start to dwindle, and I start to ask God, like, am I going to be okay? Are you sure that I'm doing what I think I'm doing? Because you brought me some to the wall, a few times. So listen, between me and my kids, we've bought the double bag of flour from Costco. I have my yeast starter, some salt, and some water, and some olive oil, depending on the recipe, if I'm doing, obviously, the tortillas. Very, very simple. We make all of our food. We don't go out to eat. And this is the way that we live. And God provides for us. And when we sit down to eat, we have these little things that we've made, and we feel that we're living, that He has given to us abundantly. It's just not the same way that the world defines it. Now, as far as the building in my house is in foreclosure. I believe that the building is going to be in foreclosure. If it's not already, I received that thing in the mail, and, like I said, I believe in what God has said. I don't go to experts and say, I got this thing and this is the situation I'm in and rescue me. No, I know what God has told me. I know that He told me to keep that building. Now, here's the thing. That building was supposed to pay for, well, not supposed to, but in my mind, I thought the building was going to pay, and it would have been enough to pay for my house. It would have been enough to pay for me to live the rest of the time that I'm here, and that's what I thought I was going to do, and that's what would strategically make sense to the world, wouldn't it? And I obeyed the command that God says, if you have the money, and that you don't put someone off. Like, if you have the money to pay something that you owe, you pay it. And I did that all the way to draining the resources of my retirement and my savings in the midst of God taking me out of my career. So, I had a very, very successful career. Most people cannot afford to buy a house, let alone a building. So that should be proof enough that I had a very successful career, that I gave up. And there's nothing to go back to. And I knew that at a certain point. I knew that if I gave up these contracts, that my reputation was never going to be something that my reputation in the world and in the field was never going to be something that I was going to be able to reclaim, because actually, I'm damaging my reputation. You think those people understand why I left everything that I had? These are the decisions that I've made along the way, and I haven't made them because it was something that I wanted to do. I didn't want to give up my very cushy life as a semi-retired, in my early 40s woman, single woman, no husband whose income I was going to be able to rely on. God said, I am your husband. I will take care of you, and you need to trust me. Okay. So when it came time to sell the building, He told me that He was not done with it. There were a series of different things that happened as well. Like, the gross realtor started saying things like, you call this, or you call it prayer, I call it manifesting. Claims to be a Jew, doesn't observe Sabbath, just stuff like that, okay? And it made me feel sick inside. And as I was taking these things up with God and asking him, I mean, do you want to bless this guy, Lord? Is that what you want to do? You want to sell this building that you've taught me so much about how to take care of your house through? Are you now going to sell it? And who would you sell it to? You're going to sell it to some pagan to make money off of it when you didn't allow me to even, you never allowed me to make money off of that building. You've had me take care of that building, and you've said things to me like, I will keep this place empty. If there is no one who is in the covenant, no one who is circumcised, this place will remain empty because no uncircumcised foreigner is going to come in here. So, okay, Lord. So that meant the staff had to go. The person who was maintaining the grounds had to go. But isn't that what he does with his house? So he's used this building in order to teach me. That is just one example. I'm telling you, I bought that building. It was a marijuana dispensary. It stunk. It was filthy. There were people who were squatting on the property. It was disgusting. And that is the situation with his church right now. So he taught me how to clean it up, how to protect it, how to guard it. There is so much that he has taught me through it. And he continues to teach me through it. And he said to me, I'm not done with it. So, okay, well, I don't have any more money to pay my mortgage at either place. So here's what I want you to know. This person was asking me, so what about homeowners insurance? What about, or hazard insurance for the commercial property? Taxes, mortgage, maintenance, utilities, things like that. No, I have not paid any of that. My bills are not paid. And I want to tell you something. This is not the way I lived previously. If I had lived this way, there's no way I would have gotten to where I was. There's no way I would have had the credit to be able to purchase anything. Okay? I have not paid any of the bills for either of these properties, and yet all of the utilities continue to be on in both properties. No one is paying my bills, including me. God has conformed things. I don't know how he's doing it, but he's doing it. And I'm not talking about a few months. I'm talking about several months. And this channel is my witness. I've told you for several months that I haven't had the money to do that. I barely have money for my basic needs. So I think that I want to make sure that no one is making the assumption that someone on the channel is donating to me and paying for these things, because that is not true. There are not enough people who believe to where God's servants at this point would be provided for that way. That's the truth. There are not enough people who believe. And moreover, if that were the way that I was making my living, that I was making my living, I don't even know what that means anymore. If that was the way that I was surviving, is based on other people providing for me, I would not be able to speak the way that I speak, because eventually I would sell out to that. That doesn't mean that I don't accept the offerings and collections that have been taken up, which are few and far between, guys. There's actually one person, who has more recently been giving gifts through which I've been able to meet my basic needs, through which I've been able to give back to my children for all of the help that they've been providing me. So I don't want anyone to think that that's what's going on here, that I'm even saying these things in order for you to give me something, because I have not compromised what God has me speak in the least. And I never will. And the other day, I was having a conversation with that person, and I made sure that I felt a need to make sure that they were providing these gifts with the right motives. I want to make sure that no one thinks that this is the way by which you're going to buy your way into God's favor, or, I think some people in the past, certain people have thought like that if they provided provided something that would prevent them from being corrected. I genuinely believe that was that ended up being what was in their heart. There is no compromise to what it is that I'm doing. I do not serve both God and money. And so I say to you, this thing that this man said to me, one of these things, you're in the one of these things is not like the other category, because I know that the things that I say are not the things that you're hearing from other people. And this is also why I've really come down on those who are speaking, who have set themselves up in ministry, because I know what I'm doing. I know that I'm a witness, and that God has sent his prophets, his witnesses at this time in history, and no one else is speaking the truth, or they would have been a witness. So to see that there are so many ministries that look just like each other, and then there's me, who does not look like the others. You should be discerning this. This is not a sitcom or a reality show for your entertainment. But I know that that's the way that you guys, that many of you treat my testimony, that you're just kind of waiting to see what happens. And this man made a really good point in his message to me, that people treat religion, modern day religion, as a source of entertainment. You know, you jump up and down at the rock show, entertaining your flesh. Oh, Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. And you chant Jesus, Jesus. I mean, it's weird. It's weird. That is not what God established. That is not the covenant. That is not the church. It's a church, but a church is not the church. And in Revelation 17, you discover that there are a lot of churches who God refers to as prostitutes, who bore out of their harlot mother, the Catholic Church. And in John 4, you discover you're not going to be worshiping in some building that people call a temple or a church, or even Jerusalem. You're going to worship in the spirit and in truth. But that's not the way that people treat. I mean, there's someone on the channel who I chuckle with all the time, not necessarily because this is funny in an entertaining way, but it's ridiculous. We chuckle out of the ridiculousness of thinking that you got to get all gussied up to go worship God. Like, what is that? You're going to wear your Sunday best? What even is that? I just want you guys to understand the way that I'm living. And I want you to understand that this isn't what you were taught in the world. And it isn't even like according to our own understanding. This is like bananas, nuts. So to not have people asking me questions about like the things that I talk about makes me think a lot of you are nuts. Like, what are you doing listening to a person who seems to have conflicting messages and not asking them, can you clarify this? Where are you coming from? That you're not asking me questions, that you're not testing my spirit. I'm not saying like, you know, you lean on your own understanding and you say, oh, she's saying things that seem to be conflicting, unsubscribe, and then you disappear. That's not right. Test my spirit. Ask me the questions, because I have answers to these questions. Now, I want to share this with you because this was really, really meaningful to me. When that man sent that message to me yesterday and was asking me these questions, I am 100%, 100% always going to provide you an answer. I am not above questioning. What God's servants are supposed to be is above reproach. That means above questionable behavior, which means that when people ask you a question, you answer it. That's what Jesus did. You answer for yourself. That said, there's a difference between the spirit of Satan who's coming around to confuse and accuse versus a person who's really asking a question. And I knew that he was really asking a question. He was very respectful about it, even saying, like, I know this is outside of the realm of anything that's my business, so feel free to let me know that. Personally, I think it is your business, and I think it's your responsibility to ask these questions. Because how can you discern someone while just setting aside the things that don't make sense? You can't. It's your responsibility to test their spirit, to look at their fruit, and to ask God, are they from you or not? But I want to share with you what my process was after responding to him, because I did respond to him. But in the process of writing back to him, I was thinking, like, I know the things that I've done with you, God. I know the things that you've told me to do. I know that I've obeyed them, and I know that I've taken up with you and asked you for a witness of like, why are you doing this? And with the building, the witness that one of the witnesses that he's given me many witnesses on that, because it's been a continual thing. I mean, I'm not going to make money off of that building. If that building were to sell, if my home were to sell, I'm not going to receive anything because I haven't been paying anything for a while. It would be tied up in fees and all of the fraud that the banks commit in order to defraud people of their homes. So I'm not hanging on to this because it's some sort of investment or because I'm receiving anything from it. It's a burden to me a lot of the time, and by the way, coming on this channel and speaking to people who don't respond has felt like a burden to me at times. But see, God has used that building and all of the ways that I invested my own personal resources, including my time and energy, to go over there and clean up and, do all of these things and give it love and water the plants and, all of those things. He uses that to teach me how to give to you, even though I'm not getting anything back, even though people can easily discard me, even though I receive messages accusing me of all kinds of things, even though when people come into the body, I am entering their battle and I end up getting hit on their behalf, as God is molding them through me and confronting them. Hey, there's still compulsion going on. That's a common confrontation. I can still see compulsion going on in you. You need to go back and fast. You need to start journaling about what's coming up when these particular compulsions come up. It's a lot of work to work with people who are coming in and be honest with them about what I'm seeing. And there's the risk of being retaliated against, slandered. And certainly if they were paying my bills, there would be the risk of losing that, right? Do you see why that's not what God has me doing? He will provide a gift through people, but he does not provide my livelihood to the extent that I am reliant on any person to take care of my needs. I fully trust in God. And I know that any gift that is given is something that he has provided through that person. I also know that if I'm not receiving any gifts, which has historically, the entire time I've been doing this, has been the norm, that I'm not receiving anything. I don't receive anything regularly. It's been here and there. I know that he's the one I'm supposed to rely on. I know that the reason why he does that is because he doesn't want me prostituting myself to some other way of doing this ministry. And then I have to continue to believe that he is the one who's going to conform things. And I want you to consider for a moment that I've given everything to that building, which he has used to represent and help me to understand the role that I'm in. I gave everything to do what I'm doing right now for you. I never asked you guys for anything. I lived on my savings. I lived on my retirement, and even to the point of being in foreclosure and potentially losing my home, which I will not lose my home because God has told me to stay here. And he told me to keep that building. He's going to conform things. But there's no one on this channel who has the money to rescue me from that. So you should be able to discern that no one's been paying my hazard insurance. No one's been paying my taxes or my mortgage or anything else. If they were, that would be a heck of a lot of money to be receiving in a month. And as I said, there's not enough people who believe to even provide the basics of what I need. There are times when I go out to my garden, as I did the other day, because I was getting a little sick of beans and rice, and I decided to make a soup with that broth that I canned. And there were a few broccolis. I mean, broccoli doesn't grow all that well in my area in SoCal because it's hot. But there was just enough broccoli for me to put in a soup. Some lettuce had come up, and one lone sweet potato that got beat by the wind, or its vine got beaten by the wind. I mean, that's how I live, guys. And so I go out and look in my garden. Is there anything? And God provides certain things. And you appreciate them so much more because, like, one sweet potato, yeah, I can use that one sweet potato to make myself some soup. In this very moment, I don't need more than that to make a pot of soup. One sweet potato. So I can live on what God gives me a moment at a time. I don't need a pagan storehouse. What I need is to know that I'm in him, because I know that when that pot of soup runs out, that, by the way, doesn't have a whole rainbow of vegetables and blah, blah, blah. It has some very basic things, some potato, onion, a sweet potato now, some broccoli, and some lettuce. I know some people don't realize that you can put lettuce in soup. Actually, there are soups that call for lettuce in the recipe, and it's delicious. In any event, as I was responding to his message, I felt really small and really low. Not because of him, it's not his fault. He did good asking me those questions, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to even feel the feelings of being low and small. But as much as I know what God has done with me, as much as I know what it is that I'm doing on a daily basis, I have to keep going to him and reaffirming that what I'm doing is indeed what he has told me to do, because believe me, I sit here and go, this is nuts. This is so crazy. This is really what you require of your servants. So I know that. How do I communicate that to somebody else? I'm even struggling in this video to really communicate. I can't convince you that God has done this in me. It has to be something that he gives you the understanding to know. It has to be something that he testifies to you. And it has to come from your desire to actually love truth and really want to know what the truth is. Because when you hear the truth and you discover that this is how God's servants are living, it brings into question how you're living, doesn't it? And I can tell you from personal experience that the majority of people, when they hear about these things and they're considering them, they do not want to accept them. And it has nothing to do with me. It has everything to do with the fact that they don't want to be held to that same standard. They don't want that God. So it freaks them out, and they start condemning God and condemning his servant in order to justify themselves. They'll start accusing me not because of me, but because they don't want to believe that God would even do this. And yet look at the scriptures. Did God tell Jeremiah to go buy a field in the midst of Babylon laying siege to Jerusalem? And didn't Jeremiah say to God, you're telling me that Babylon is laying siege to Jerusalem, and yet you're telling me to go buy this field? And did God not respond to Jeremiah by teaching him why it is that he had him buy that field, the symbolism, teaching him through buying that field that Jeremiah was not going to be able to make any money off of, was not going to be able to even tend, a garden in? But God wanted to reveal something through him buying that field. He wanted him to know that there was coming, that even though God was rejecting his people, there was coming a time in the future when Israel, those who are actually in the covenant, will return to the land. So yes, he had Jeremiah do something that outright was nuts. It was bananas. It didn't make sense, but God made it make sense. And that's what he's done with me. How do I even communicate that to another person? And I just felt so low, and I, to be honest, spent the next few hours crying, because this is what I've been taking up with God is no one believes, Lord. I know that because no one obeys. I can't make them see. There's a tree out in front of the building that during the windstorms and the fire, it snapped in a couple of spots. And the last trip that I made to the office, I noticed that the tree is dying. Like half of it is dying. I don't know if it can be saved, but it's too much for me to be able to do. And it's too much for me to be able to pay for. What am I going to do? So I keep taking this up with him, and I keep crying out to him and saying, you have not given me the resource. You've given me these responsibilities, but you haven't given me the resources to be able to manage them. And this is paralleling, okay? Again, he teaches me through the building. It is paralleling something else I've been crying out to him about, which is you've given me this message. You've given me this truth. You've made me know what the truth is, and you have me speak it. And you have me speak it clearly and directly and truthfully. There's nothing that I'm doing that is preventing people from being able to understand the message. It's you. You're the one who has blocked their hearts from being able to understand. And that's what you do. And unless you make them see, they will not see. So you've not given me the resources to be able to bring this house to fruition. You have me continue to go to the building and prune and clean and water and do all of these things. You speak a word to me. You build me on a daily basis. You wake me and instruct me. And I go to them and I speak a message, but I can't make them obey. Only you can conform these things the way that you want them. Only you can uproot that tree. Only you can prune that tree. Only you can give it life or decide if it's going to die. All I am is an instrument in your hand. Well, I answered the questions and I explained where I'm coming from, some of where I'm coming from, because there's so much. I mean, it's impossible for me to tell you everything that God has done or all of the ways that he has confirmed for me what I am to do. He told me to keep these properties, and that's what I've done. He hasn't told me how he's going to make the way, but when does he ever do that? I mean, he told the Israelites to do many things and didn't tell them how he was going to make a way. That's not his pattern. He doesn't give us the play-by-play. He expects us to believe in the things he's told us to do. He expects us to obey them, and then to stand in faith that if he's told us to obey, he's going to make a way. There's no reasonable explanation why the greedy utility companies or cities have continued to provide water, power, gas. I still have a car. But I'm going to tell you, if I sit here in my flesh and think about these things, then I'm going to feel like any minute now, my car could be repossessed. Any minute now, my power, my gas, my water, everything could be shut off. Where am I going to go? What am I going to do with everything that I have? I haven't started selling it. I haven't started making plans to give it away because God told me to stay here. He didn't tell me to do those things. And believe me, I've asked him. What I have to do in order to stay sane is to get into the Spirit. The Spirit where is the only place that I can understand the things he's told me to do. It's the only place that I can stay sane. It's the only place that he's going to assure me and confirm for me and provide me a witness that I'm doing what he told me to do. I have to do that on a daily basis or I will go nuts. And he does provide me that witness. But you know what else I have to do? Is I have to remember the things he's done. I can't just say, well, yeah, you did, on January 26th, you did delay the foreclosure. You did delay the auction of my house. But I need something new right now. No, that's not the way I pray. Lord, if you're willing, I would be so grateful if you would provide a witness to comfort me. But in the meantime, here are the things that you've done. This is how I know that I'm doing what you told me to do. Here are my questions. Here's what you've done with your servants in the Bible. So I spent the next few hours after sending those messages, crying, feeling very low, sorting through the questions that I had with God, making sure this is what I've been doing, right, Lord? Wondering, not wondering for the purpose of pleasing man over God, but wondering, this man gonna think I'm crazy? Does he think I'm crazy for these things that I've done? How can I make him understand? How can I make him see what God is doing with me? I hardly know what he's doing with me. I know a few things. And then I received a response in which he framed the things that I was explaining to him within the context of Scripture, within the context of what Paul was going through, within the context of what God was doing with Abraham and what God promised to Abraham And it was clear that he understood because he'd taken the time and has been taking the time to ask these questions, to discern them with God, to test them by God's word, and to test my spirit. You have to know that one of these things is not going to be like the others when you're looking at God's people, when you're looking at his servants, that if you're looking like the world, it's because you belong to it. If the things that God is bringing you through make sense to the world, that's not God doing that. Every servant, every apostle, every prophet was being brought through a process that was painful, a process in which they kept crying out to God, and God kept crushing them and building them and demonstrating his glory. They weren't just waiting to be picked up. They didn't believe that they were already saved. They knew that they were working out a covenant, that they were working out their salvation, and that this is their duty at the end of the day, that's what the word says. We don't even know the places we need to go. And remember that when Jesus was talking about it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to be saved, the apostles said, who can be saved then? And Jesus said, with man, this is impossible, but with God, all things are possible. Why? Because I was a rich woman, according to the world, at one time. So I'm going to tell you why. Because God has brought me to a place of humility and obedience that I would not have believed was necessary. I wouldn't have felt that that was necessary. He had to bring me deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. And he's still doing it. I'm still here, guys. If I was saved, what would I still be doing here? Why am I still here? Why am I suffering? Then if I've already been saved, then the mentality of those who believe they've already been saved is, I'm going to build my empire, and the things I pray about are going to be for my own will. And then, one day God's going to pick me up. And you would say things like, I'm ready, without realizing that you have no idea what needs to happen in order for you to be ready. The reason you're here is because you're not ready. The reason you're here is because there's still work that God is doing. There's still work that you need to do, or you wouldn't be here. You're going to go through a furnace. You're going to be afflicted. God is going to give you, he's going to give you the choice. He gave me the choice. He proved himself to me, and then he would say, listen, this niche that you have that's brought you so much status and glory in the world, it's not of me. You know now that it conflicts with the things that I've taught you about what I'm doing and about my own sovereign power and role over my creations. You know that I'm not destined by people to go to idols, to go to doctors and experts. So what's it going to be? We're talking tens of thousands of dollars that I made in a month just on that one part of my career. These facilities where they're killing my people with poisons, stealing from them, breaking down their temples. This isn't of me. And you need to cancel those contracts if you want to serve me. More tens of thousands of dollars. What will that even do for me in the end? A few more years of living here with all of that money, I won't take it with me. I'm destined to burn in the lake, for the smoke of my torment to rise forever and ever. And also, I worked real hard to build that career. I worked really hard to get that doctorate. My daughter sacrificed her mother while I was doing that because the world told me that and praised me for working full time and going to school full time. Well, I say raising my daughter, but really, who was raising my daughter while I was doing all of that? We missed the most precious thing God gave us, time and relationship. And by the time she was with me, I was exhausted. The most important role I had, to raise my child. And though there are some good things that I did, I'm watching her and the way that she's doing things with her children, with her family. And it's one of the most painful things in my entire existence to know that I did not do those things, that I had not been given the sense to understand, and that I have been living through a time of such deception that I couldn't have possibly known. that that was the right thing to do. And I had to sort through all of those feelings as I was letting go of everything I did that I thought was actually right, that I thought was good, that I had worked for a future for my daughter, as though my daughter's future is contingent on money and not God. But I know that I'm doing what's right now. I know that I'm working towards a future for me, for my daughter, for my son-in-law, my grandchildren, that can't be bought by money. It does not consist in an abundance of things. I gave up my savings, my retirement, my daughter's inheritance, my so-called security in the world, to at times not know whether I'm going to be able to afford basic needs. And I did it in part to be able to provide something to you for free, to not be a burden to you. And even as I say that to you, I know that many people won't even understand what that sacrifice even is. Won't bother to sit and think about what that sacrifice has been, or how my family is living right now after having sacrificed so much to not have to be in a position like this. These things can't be understood by your flesh. It doesn't make sense that a person would work that hard and give it all up unless by the Spirit you know what it is to be in Christ, what it is to be moved by Him, to be that rich man who left everything behind because he got a taste of the heavenly gift. To be the man who sold everything he had to go buy that land and dig up that treasure. That's what I've done, and it doesn't make sense to the world. So you need to ask the questions, because you need to test my spirit if you haven't. You need to ask God the questions, because there's no way for Him to testify if you're not directing your attention to what He's doing. If you just gather around yourself a bunch of teachers and you listen to them and take them at face value, you never question anything, especially the things that sound nuts. I claim to you that I am one of 144,000 witnesses in this world at this time in history, calling people back into repentance before the Antichrist rises, because God says He does nothing without revealing to His prophets first, or rather through His prophets first, in order to call you in. That's a pretty bold claim, guys. It's so bold, in fact, and I am so undeserving of it, in fact, that I continuously go back to God and to make sure that that's what I'm doing, because I can hardly believe it myself. How do you so readily just accept the things I say? Unless this is just a pull up the popcorn moment to see what's going to happen and you don't get this at all. You know, the word talks about how the people go to Ezekiel and they say, let's go hear the word of the Lord, hear the word of the Lord. And they go sit and listen to him as though he's one who's playing an instrument well or singing a song well. But they don't put anything he says into practice. And that's exactly what happens on this channel. But I can't give you the resources. But I will tell you one thing, that when I received that message from this man who had discerned, who was understanding what I'm doing from the perspective of Scripture, I got up and started walking, and I very rarely have had this experience, but I did last night when I read that message. I dropped to my knees because I've been waiting a really long time for people to hear the message, for God to testify to them and give them the ability to see what I'm doing. And I know that He's still discerning, but He's been doing this with people. He brought somebody into the body who's talking about the things that God is showing her. And I just kept thanking Him, because I know that I'm probably not going to see the fruit of my labor, but look how much I've given for it. And I really long to see it, to hear someone who really believes and who's really discerning and really taking this up to God, who doesn't treat my offering with contempt, isn't flippant about the things that I'm sharing with you. This is my life. This is my children's life. I went from not having to ever worry about money was never going to have to worry about money ever again, to being evacuated from my house and going to stay with my children and my pregnant daughter, and none of us had any money for food. Do you know how terrible that feels? And yet, on a daily basis, God provided with what we had in the cupboards. He provided abundantly. And every time we sat down to eat, it was like we were eating a feast. We even had a guest join us. I was at the table rolling out tortillas. I had just pulled bread from the oven. My neighbor's tree dropped about 500 avocados in the windstorm, so he gave them all to me. And so we had avocado cucumber salad. It was delicious. We had white bean soup. I mean, it was like, it just felt abundant. Even though, and I want you to hear this, even though in the midst of that, we did not know when we were going to, or how we would receive the next bit of provision to be able to go to the store. But you know what? We did. We did end up receiving provision to be able to buy groceries. He did provide. But I just want you to understand that you can't appreciate and you can't bring yourself to certain places. God has to bring you there. And that's what he means when he says, with man, it's impossible, but with God, all things are possible. God knows the places you need to go. Don't fight him on it. If you believe that, you'll accept it. I hope that this message has meant something to you. I admittedly have not known how to convey this, but I did feel God pressing on me to share it with you. And I sincerely pray that each one of you are brought into a place to understand the value of becoming that one thing that's not like the others. It's painful. God told us it was going to be painful here. He said, if you're loved by the world, it's because you belong to it. He said the very people who kill you are going to claim to be doing a service to God. So by very nature of that statement, the people claiming to be doing a service to God, the false Christians, the Antichrist kingdom, are going to accuse God's people of not being like them. And they're not like them. But they will have defined themselves to have been chosen, and therefore, because you're not like the others, because you haven't drank the Kool-Aid and ingested that into your heart, you're going to be killed. Please discern this message with God.